So that you get recorded for posterity as we go.
And can we share this recording with our team? Because I've tried to get people on the team to come to this, because I don't think they think big enough.
Any objections to having this recording be shared with others internally? Thank you all. So what would you like to have happen as a result of our conversations today and tomorrow? Just a simple statement or a question. If you're here to learn, what would you like to learn? If this makes a difference in your fundraising, what would you like to have happen?
Do you want to call on somebody, or should whoever just
I think we can
speaks?
just popcorn here, just pop up.
Okay, I'll start in popcorn into Ashley over. We have just really started to get into fundraising because, like I said earlier, we're all membership revenue driven to the tune of about $1.2 million. But now we're taking on these big initiatives. And so we want to raise funds for those initiatives that cross the whole industry. Ashley?
Right. I'm interested in learning about different fundraising models, and honestly, a lot of what the typical fundraising learning sessions I attend are about kind of trying to court individual donors. And I think Chris and I are in a similar positioning where it can be tricky to persuade donors to donate to an organization that helps businesses be more sustainable, because the first question is, well, shouldn't the business pay for that? And of course they do. The businesses are paying us directly for our services, but we're also pushing them towards cross-cutting initiatives. Another correlation to Chris's comment, because a lot of the challenges in the seafood sector are too great for one company to solve alone. So just kind of love some support in thinking through some of these historic barriers for us on fundraising.
Cool. Thanks. Would you like to call on somebody else? Monica or Marissa?
How about Marissa?
Well, I learned a lot from being in one of these from Paul before. So I've been working really closely with a transition advisory board and transition working team. So we're busy putting together kind of like a business plan that we want to begin to look at and go to. I have a huge network of people because of all the years of reaching out to people. They know who we are. I want to get their support and connections and advice to move forward, to ask for money. And I guess the thing I want to really work on next, and I put together a huge spreadsheet of everybody, the head of the Ecology Center, the head of Earth Island Institute, the people who all know me. And I'm going to start to move forward to meet with them. And I think I'm really working. My next step is the pitch. And it's not really a pitch, but the ask for the advice, how to present it, and really starting with the low-hanging fruit of the people that already know and trust me. And that's the part that I'm working up to. So
lovely. And the phrase I'm going to use to describe that is a conversation for action.
Thank you.
We have a lot of conversations in our lives, and most of them don't go anywhere, which is fine. It's wonderful to meet good people and to talk with them about interesting things, but there are particular types of conversations that lead to action. And we're even going to be more specific about that. We're really engaging in conversations that lead to action that moves towards the realization of a heartfelt dream for the future. And so that's going to be our topic for conversation. Anyone else like to share what you'd like to have happen, or a question that you have?
I'll just share. I mean, I would love through this process to have one introduction to somebody who's interested once they understand what we're up to. And then I think in 2 or 3 cases, I have some connection, seafood being one. I have connections where I may be able to be helpful to others. And just to be clear, I raise money for companies for a living. That's what Young America Capital is. So just I'm here to be helpful as much as anything.
Wonderful. Thank you. Monica, did you want to share anything about what you'd like to have happen here? I think it's reasonable to assume that you'd like to have this conversation result in raising the money to buy the new building. Am I guessing right?
That would be a correct guess. Personally, my interest in getting on the call, I feel like you and Lynn have done a lot of work together. I personally have not been a part of that for one reason or another, and I just feel like I need to get up to speed so that I can have a good overview of, I know what we're trying to achieve, but how
Yes.
to achieve it, the steps
Lovely.
that need to take place.
Thank you.
So the actions that need to take place. So that's my purpose for being on here. How does this machine work?
That's perfect. So let me share a little bit about my orientation, what I'd like to have happen out of the 3 hours roughly that we're going to spend together, because I've been referred to as the fundraising strategist, or some people call me the fundraising catalyst. And the work that I do is to work with other people to create the context within which money can be raised, to create the conditions within which money is raised. And I have a particular approach that I've developed over the last 50 years in fundraising that is applicable to many different kinds of fundraising. So major donor, major investor acquisition, foundation fundraising. We're not going to spend a lot of time on writing proposals or researching foundations, but more on how to develop relationships with foundations, corporate sponsorships, and how we develop relationships with corporations that can result in sponsorships or investments. The process is virtually the same for acquiring capital and acquiring nonprofit donors and supporters. It's about developing relationships. And one of the things that I've discovered is that fundraising doesn't have to be hard. It's really about creating conditions for a catalytic reaction between the right project and the right supporters, identifying people who care and people whose concerns are similar to what it is that you're doing, to find people who are engaged in realizing their own dreams for the future and whose dreams for the future are similar enough that what you're doing represents the realization of their heartfelt dream. We have three components of this: ditch the flash to get the cash. People spend so much time on their website and their presentation and their video and their deck and their pitch, and that's all important. But the essence of it is, do you have a heart-to-heart connection with the person who is inspired by what you're proposing to do, such that they say, oh, this is what I wanted to have happen? Where our ideal situation is to engage with someone for whom what you're doing is the realization of their dream. And the second aspect is, where's the money at? How do we find the people who can be supportive? How do we identify how to reach them? One of my old coaches used to say, if the people that you're trying to reach are easy to reach, you're trying to reach the wrong people. That's not always true, but it's still a fun axiom to think about as you're having difficulty opening a conversation with someone that you'd like to have a conversation with, and you're having difficulty getting them. And then lastly, how do we avoid the fundraising abyss? And I call this conversation number one. We could do so much if we only had more money. We need money for this. We have to pay salaries. We have to pay the rent. We have to pay our mortgage. We have to pay our development staff, and on and on. We have to acquire intellectual property or a new division. The fundraising abyss is where you're waking up at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning wondering, how do we get the money to keep on keeping on, or to do what we really care about. So those are the three areas that we're going to talk about. And in particular, ditch the flash to get the cash. It's really not necessary to be flashy. The approach that I'm going to be sharing with you, which is not, I'm not putting forth as the best approach or the only approach. It's just my approach. It's what's worked for me in raising more than $100 million for various organizations over the last 50 years. And that's not a lot of money. I'm not a huge capital fundraiser who's raised billions of dollars to build hospital wings or hospital dorms or college dorms. I have selected over the years, and sometimes been selected by, altruistic activities, real estate developments to build an eco-village, or starting a park, or a social service organization, or a social justice organization. I've picked things that I feel are going to make a difference that matters to me. And what I have found is that it's the relationships that matter. Monica will probably recognize the name of David Stewart, who's one of the richest Black men in America. And we flew on his private jet once from San Francisco to Oakland, and it was just the two of us and one other person. And so we were talking about fundraising, and he said, don't worry about the money, get the relationship right, and then the money will come. And I thought that was really deeply useful wisdom from someone whose company is worth $8 billion and he owns it. And how to be interested, not interesting. And this is a really important distinction. Fundraising is not about persuading people to do something they don't want to do. There are some people who are very good at that, and it works for some people. I don't recommend it because it's not long term. When we persuade people to do something that they don't want to do, oftentimes they get buyer's remorse, and then they have to be re-enrolled over and over again. It's much easier to be interested in what people care about and to find what I call confluence, the flowing together of what they care about and what you're proposing to do. And then developing relationships and getting connected to people is not about your presentation or your video or your deck. It's really about, do they feel like you're interested in them? And that involves facting. I've spent a lot of time with 2-year-olds when I was much younger. My bachelor's and master's degrees are both in human development. And I spent a lot of time with 2-year-olds, and 2-year-olds have this great quality of saying, they point at something and they just call your attention to that they're pointing. But if you look very carefully, they're going like this. They're saying, and they're looking at you while they're pointing to see if they got you to look. Adults do this too. When you get into someone's environment, if you point at things, oh, is that a diploma from Temple University? Did you go to Temple? Oh, that's an award. What did you get that award for? Wow, this is a really interesting house. Is it architecturally designed? I was in the home of Jean Houston, who's a wonderful anthropologist and spiritual teacher who happens to live here in Ashland. And I was in her home recently, and it's full of artifacts, ancient Egyptian artifacts, a life-size statue of the goddess Athena, and on and on. And it was just a wealth of, oh, what is that? Tell me about this. What am I seeing here? So facting is very important to draw people out and to find out what it is that they really care about. And then where's the money at? How do we find the sources of money that, when we look around, there are all these other organizations that are doing so much, and it seems like it's so easy for them. Planting Justice got $1 million from McKinsey Scott. How did that happen? How come we didn't get $1 million from McKinsey Scott? Or then Planting Justice gets $5 million from Patty Quillen. How did that happen? How come we can't get $5 million from the wife of the founder of Netflix? Sometimes it seems unfair because every project that we're working on, it seems like a wonderful project. And unfortunately, it's not about fairness. If the reason that you're raising money was all it took to raise money, then there would be no more starving children in the world. and every new invention would be brought to market easily. Ralph Waldo Emerson was wrong when he said, build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. It doesn't happen like that. A lot of really good mousetraps out there have not made it to market because they didn't have the ability to find the supporters that they needed to come to market. And so we do two things. We talk with those that we might not have thought of, and we ask people, with whom should we be speaking that we might not have thought of? And then we cultivate a sequence of a conversation that leads to a possibility, a conversation for possibility that leads to a conversation for action. I'm going to slow down here for a minute to invite any comments or questions on what I've said so far before we keep diving into this process. And welcome to Dr. Dwayne Hendricks. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So what does this provoke in you? What do you, as I'm talking about these things, have you gone, well, no, that's not true for me, or wow, that's interesting, I'd like to know more about that? I know this is a difficult question, so take a moment to consider how's this impacting you? Oh, and welcome to Vanessa. So I take from the silence that how this is impacting you as, well, this is interesting. I need to learn more.
Well, I've got to say that you just relieved me a bit because I'm at that point where I'm getting ready to reach out to people and I'm thinking, oh, how's our website looking? We talked about that in our team meeting yesterday. And I said, we've got to really make sure it's flash and this and that and everything. And what you're saying relieves me a lot. And I've got to remember what you're saying is it's really about the connection. It's about, being, I think, in person with somebody so you can experience what you share in common that you are excited about. So you have that connection. And I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's the opposite of when you have your cell phone camera and you push the little icon that turns the camera around so it's pointing at you. We're going to do the opposite of that. We push the button that turns the camera around so it's pointing at them.
Mhm.
And you're interested, not interesting. One of the organizations that I care about a lot, several decades back, was invited to a private island that belonged to a billionaire in the Caribbean. And they went to see this person, it was a couple, at their old Spanish fort on this island. And they brought with them the plans for the building that they were raising money for. And when I met with this billionaire a few months later, he said, I wouldn't give any money to that project. And I said, why? And he said, I invited them to my house in the Caribbean, and they walked in, rolled out their plans on the kitchen table, talked about the building that they wanted to build, and asked me if I would support it. And they never once asked me about the building that they were standing in.
Mm.
It was a 400-year-old Spanish fort. And this guy really wanted to talk about how proud he was of his island. And they never asked. So be interested, not interesting, is the theme of the day today.
I would just like to say that, yes, I am from Planting Justice. I did not raise that money. So that is why I am here today. We have an amazing fundraising team, and I'm here to take just a little pressure off. So,
Well, I'm not entirely inclined to agree with you about that, because I talk about creating the context within which money can be raised. And you are an important part of the context within which that money was raised. And so although your presence may be invisible and unrecognized by many people around you, the truth is that you did raise that money because of who you are and what you do for planting justice. That's just my considered professional opinion.
Checks in the mail.
And no, she didn't pay me to say that. So when we go into this last area, or I should say before we go into this last area, the where the money's at question is really important. And the question is, where is the money at? How do we find the money? And so we're going to engage with that question intensely over the next hour and more tomorrow. The last piece, though, that we're going to talk about is avoiding the fundraising abyss, because worrying about not raising money is stressful. And we want to avoid failure by being careful how we start. But we need to ask these questions. What will happen if you don't raise the money you need? And I'd like to ask you to put in the chat a number from 1 to 3. And 1 is just getting started. And 3 is we've already raised all the money we need. The rest is gravy. So if we use 1, 2, or 3, 1 being we're just getting started raising the money. And I'm seeing if I can figure out how to mute everybody here.
Hi there. I'm trying to mute something and I can't figure it out.
Let's see, and I can't figure it out either. Here we go. All right, everybody's muted but me. I'd like to ask you to put in the chat a number of 1 to 3, where 1 is we're just getting started, and 3 is we've already succeeded. We have all the money we need. So 1, 2, or 3. Dwayne's at a 1. David's at 1.5 for this particular project. Marissa's at a 1. Chris is at a 2. Monica's a 1. Lynn's at 1.5. Okay, so we're all in it, almost all in a very similar place where we're just getting started, or we've gotten started, but we have a long way to go still. So this is that question, what'll happen if you don't raise the money, that can keep you up at night? And lots of people spend too much time developing what in fundraising is called the case statement. It's really important to have a deck, to have a presentation, to have that 1-minute video. Back in the last century, we used to have brochures, and having some physical brochures are still useful. Once in a while, you get to give them to people. But it's really more about getting to the people who can support you. And in my approach to fundraising, that's about the relationship. It's not about the literature or the website or the fancy presentation. And once again, if the people you're trying to reach are easy to reach, you might be trying to reach the wrong people. So it's oftentimes difficult. When we went to see David Stewart in St. Louis a few years ago, it took us 6 months and 5 attempts to get the appointment. So be persistent. And a lot of people defer. They say, oh, we can't start raising money until we have our strategic plan. We can't start raising money until we have our list of prospective donors in place. Actually, one of the songs at the end of La Cage aux Folles is particularly appropriate for that. The best of times is now. The best time to raise money is now. You can always get started cultivating relationships with the people who are going to support you. We're going to touch briefly tomorrow on how to develop committees, boards, and schedule events. I'll just say one thing about events today, which I'll repeat tomorrow. Events don't raise money, people do. And so if you're thinking about doing a fundraising event, be sure you know whom are you going to ask for money and who's going to do the asking. If you're selling tickets, who's going to sell the tickets, to whom are they going to sell them? And if you're thinking of having a celebrity at your event, be sure to have a plan in place for what happens if the celebrity doesn't show up. If they can't come, now what? So lots more to talk about in all of that context. What is the context? I've developed what I call the cycle of creative dreaming, or sometimes I call this the 7 C's. And this came out of my master's thesis 40 years ago, which was titled Dreams for the Future. And I studied how people's lives change when they have a dream to live for that's bigger than themselves, whether it's bringing a product to market or taking over a company or starting a nonprofit or realizing an altruistic mission. The process is very similar. It starts with confluent intuition. And what I mean by confluent intuition is that felt sense that you know that something is important to you, that you rise to the occasion, that you're drawn to that. Ron Nazer, the provost at Presidio Graduate School 20 years ago, used to say, what's the one thing that you cannot not do? So this confluent intuition is this sense that I can't quite explain to you what it is I'm talking about, but I can point at it. Or like the old definition of obscenity, I can't tell you what it is, but I know it when I see it. Nikola Tesla, who invented the alternating current generator, would see his inventions in the air. He would actually see them, and he could go to a machinist and describe what he saw so precisely that they could make the parts to assemble the device that he was visualizing. So you're the one of the only ones who has this confluent intuition, this sense of what it is you're going to. So that leads to creative imagination. What would it be like if? What could we do if? How would the world change if? That whole imaginal realm of daydreaming, reverie, wondering, designing, conceiving, that comes out of the confluent intuition because you have a sense of what it is that you're up to, what you're drawn to. Is it railroad locomotives, or is it race cars, or is it the ocean and the fish in the ocean? Is it forests and the life of the forest? Is it pet food and people's relationships with their pets? Is it formerly incarcerated people and how do we help them develop pro-social lives? You know what it is that you're drawn to, and the creative imagination helps you flesh out that vision to begin to describe it. But that then moves into careful intention, because there are two brackets here. One is be careful what you ask for, you might get it. So being as specific as we can, but also be as thorough as you can, because if you leave things out, the dream stream will fill in the gaps that you leave, and not always in the way that you had intended or that you would have wanted if you had thought to say so. And I'll give an embarrassing personal example here. Went through a very painful divorce in the 1980s. And after I had been through the divorce, I became a success motivation goal setting consultant. And so I had written a list of 14 qualities that I wanted in the perfect relationship that was going to fulfill that void that was left when I got divorced. And I met a woman who had 13 of the 14 qualities that I had wanted. And I was as specific as I could be. Like the national dance of Sweden is called the hambo. And I wanted someone who could dance the hambo. And I wanted environmental values and spiritual values. And I had all these qualities that I had listed. She didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes, but I conceded that that was a culturally induced fantasy and that I didn't necessarily care about that one. And after more than 5 years of pursuing this woman and living together and having a wonderful relationship, something became clear. She met the man of her dreams, and it wasn't me. And I realized in retrospect that the one thing I had forgotten to put on the list was loves me. So be careful with your intention as you develop your creative imagination. Make sure you include as much as you possibly can. And the things that you thought were obvious, put them on the list. The background of obviousness, if you're designing a building, or if, one of my subject for my master's thesis, had created a restaurant and folk art center that was a for-profit enterprise in Los Angeles. And he had designed the building out of what he saw in a dream. He actually saw the building in a dream, and he built the building that he had seen, raised the money to do it. And he realized after the building was finished that he had forgotten to put drains in the cement floors. So when they went to wash the floors, there was no place to drain the water to. And you know, 2020 hindsight, they'd already poured the cement. So careful intention is that whole design phase. They say that 85% of the problems with systems happened in the design phase, because once you get to implementing, it's too late. Then we have conscious attention, which is really evaluating what we've set out and making sure that it's what we want to do, and that this is the planning phase, the mission, vision, values, scenario planning, goal setting, objectives, all that kind of stuff coming out of careful intention and conscious attention. That leads us to concerted action. This is when we're doing something that's bigger than ourselves, that we can't do it ourselves. We need to coordinate with other people and develop roles and responsibilities and shared vision for the future that we're going to realize. And then moving towards momentum and realization of the dream, allowing calm reflection, the feedback sessions where we think about, is this really how we want it to go? Gary Erickson tells the story of when Cliff Bar had hit momentum. Cliff Bar had made it into the market, and they had received an offer to sell the company. This is many years ago, for $60 million. He went for a walk around the block before he signed the paperwork to sell the company. You know, his ship had come in. He was going to be set for life. And he walked around the block and he thought about selling the company, and he realized that he wasn't ready to sell the company. He was afraid that it was going to get ruined and it wouldn't become what he wanted it to be. And so he came back in and said, no, I can't do this. Of course, his partner sued him, and he had to raise $40 million to buy her out, to make sure that he could take the company back. But that calm reflection is really important. Ray Anderson used to call it mid-course correction. And then lastly, consistent gratitude, recognizing throughout this process as we go that being given creative ideas to realize a dream for the future that's worthwhile and altruistic is a gift. It's a blessing. So I'm going to slow down again to give you a chance to comment on this cycle of creative dreaming. What does this bring up for you? Do you see something that you recognize here? Do you see something that's missing for you? Chris, you can unmute yourselves. I apologize, I muted everybody, so you can't just pop up like we were doing before.
Can you explain the very top one again, confluent?
Yeah,
Intuition.
it's really my favorite part, confluent intuition. This is where you have a felt sense. Michael Polanyi called it the tacit dimension, where you don't necessarily even have words to put around it yet, or images to communicate what it is you're talking about, but you know that you're being drawn towards, or you're pushing off of and moving away from something. And so, as I said earlier, you know that it's about oceans and fish, or you know it's about pets and pet food and the relationship between people and their pets, or you know that it's about the prison system and justice involved individuals and families and communities. So you have this felt sense that this is what is being presented to me as an opportunity for investing my one wild and adventurous life in a particular area of life, whether it's race relations or for-profit technological innovations or agriculture. You have a sense that this is, I can't tell you exactly what it is yet, but I know what it's not. And I know how to
So
turn
it's
away. Say
Is
again?
it's kind of like identifying your passion?
Yeah, it's a lot like that. And but it's not always passion. I don't mean to say that everybody's life has to be driven by this all-consuming passion, like having a mission in life or a purpose for living. Sometimes it's just an affinity. I'd prefer to work for this company rather than that company. I'm going to put my life in service to a particular area with my day job, and then on my weekend, I'm going to go be with my children or my grandchildren. It doesn't have to be this wonderfully religious, zealous passion that drives all of life. But for many of us, it is. In my career, I've particularly been drawn to creative dreamers who are that kind of passionate, who are mission-driven people, who have chosen a particular emphasis for their lives. And one of the big challenges as a development consultant, helping people grow their organization towards realizing a dream is helping people stop once in a while, is helping the founding executive director take a vacation, or God forbid, take a day off, or stop working at 5 or 6 o'clock, not 11 or 12 at night or 1 o'clock in the morning. It doesn't have to be this all-consuming passion. In fact, you need to have balance in living to make sure that you exercise and go for a walk in nature or those kinds of things. But that's that confluent intuition where it's something that you're drawn to that is unique in your life. It's the one thing that you're going to focus on today or for this period. And oftentimes it doesn't come in fully formed. It comes in as a felt sense. That's why we call it confluent intuition. It's the flowing together of the circumstances of waking life with an intuitive dream or a heartfelt sense for what's possible. Does that make sense to you so far?
A lot more than you just explained it like that. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, there was a wonderful book written in the last century called Focusing by a psychologist named Eugene Gendlin, who popularized this phrase felt sense of taking a moment to be quiet inside yourself and feel your way into what's going on here. And that's an intuitive process. This does not preclude the opportunity of just taking on a goal or a vision or a set of objectives because it seems like the right thing to do. It doesn't have to be a big mystical inquiry. I'm just drawn to people who organize their lives. Andy Lipkus, who started the Tree People in Los Angeles, found out that smog was killing the forest. And he just said, that's not right. And he dedicated his life to ending smog in Los Angeles by 1995. We failed. But that's the kind of vision that I'm drawn to, someone who just has a sense of this is possible and I'm going to organize my life around doing what I can. And there's an old Jewish axiom that says, you may not be able to realize the dream, but that does not absolve you from having to work towards it. I phrased that badly, but the idea being that you may not live to see the fruits of your labors, but that does not absolve you from the responsibility to plant a tree. Back in the 1960s, we used to have integration activities to get races together and begin dialogue. And one of the things we did was we sang folk songs like Kumbaya. That has become an internet meme and a subject of ridicule. Oh, now we're going to have a kumbaya moment. We're all going to put our arms around our shoulders and sing, and everything's going to be fine. Like those of us who did that failed, because we did fail. We did not finish the job of equity and diversity and inclusion in modern culture, but we did what we could, and it was a step in what we considered the right direction. So that's this confluent intuition of feeling your way into what is it that I have to do to feel good at the end of the day that I contributed in a meaningful and positive way. It's a big deal for me. And it's where
you didn't fail.
Yes, that's right. And it's where fundraising comes from. Because if you have that kind of identity, they used to say you can't sell a product that you don't believe in. That's actually not true, but it's a whole lot more satisfying if what you believe, if what you're raising money for is something that you really believe in, and it allows you to weather the storms. It allows you to survive the fundraising abyss when it looks like it's just not going to be possible. Planting Justice's budget this year is, what is it, Lynn, $5 or $6 million? back when it was $250,000, there were a number of times and we didn't have enough money to pay salaries, and some of us went out and borrowed money on our credit cards to be able to pay salaries. Those were the good old days. And we never know whether we're going to make it through or not in those early days, but it's the confluent intuition and the creative imagination that will see you through. Your dream for the future becomes a skyhook. You pull yourself forward towards the dream because that's sometimes the only thing that's going to pull you out of the swamp of disillusionment and the impending abyss of what'll happen if we don't succeed. If you have the dream clearly stated, then you can move towards that. So how do we do this? We engage in conversations, and in my work, which I call Dreamosophy, which is the wisdom of dreaming, we've developed a series of 7 questions that are an orchestrated conversation. It's not a canned presentation. We don't memorize stuff, but it is a sequence of conversation that's designed to lead towards a conversation for possibility and a conversation for action. So the possibility is the realization of the dream, your project, being able to hire more people, of getting the money that you need to build the building or to buy the building or to get the product to market. And it starts with being interested, not interesting. So we're going to talk a lot more about this tomorrow. So I'm just going to kind of go over it quickly here today as an introduction. But it starts with a conversation around, how did you first hear about us? This is the origin story. Who introduced you to this organization? And probably more important than that, have you invested in similar organizations or projects in the past? Tell me about it. And it helps to do a little bit of homework. You know, I heard that you built this building over there, or I heard you invested in that community, or I heard that you'd been a supporter of this organization. Can you tell me about that? People generally will do so, and sometimes in great detail, because they're passionate about what they've done in the past. And you're listening for confluence. Is what they've done in the past consistent with what you're preparing to suggest? And then, assuming you're talking with someone who knows what you're doing, and it's always best to try to get information to them in advance so that you can ask, what do you think of our current and proposed activities? Is there anything that we're proposing or doing that you don't like? Are there things that you do like? What do you resonate with? Are there any projects or activities that we should be doing that we currently aren't? And I'll just digress for a minute here around that theme. Many years ago, Irving Warner, who wrote the book, The Art of Fundraising, who was one of my great mentors as a fundraising consultant, and I were the consultants to the Los Angeles committee for the Weizmann Institute of Science. Actually, we had created that committee. We drew together 25 people who were interested in the Weizmann Institute of Science and the relationship between Americans and the Institute in Israel. And we went to see a man who was a prospective supporter who had a security company. And we were going through these questions with him. And when we asked him, are there any things that the Weizmann Institute of Science is doing, is not doing, that you think that they should be doing? He said, well, yes, actually, I think they should be doing more for the security of Israel. They should be doing more to protect Israel. And I don't think they're doing enough in that area. And we said, well, that's interesting. If they were to undertake such a project or an activity, would you provide funding or would you help? And he said, well, yes, actually, I've set aside $1 million that I'd like to use to endow a chair in security studies. And we said, well, if the Weizmann Institute of Science were willing to take that on, would that be something that you would support in that way? He said, well, yes, I would. And so we said, we'll get a little more information and we'll get back to you. The Weizmann Institute of Science was interested. And so we went back to him and said, yes, we think that's possible. What do we need to do to move that forward? He said, well, I'd like my gift to be announced at a dinner at the Century Plaza, and I'd like Henry Kissinger to be the keynote speaker. So we swallowed hard and said, okay. And it turned out that someone on the board of the Weizmann Institute of Science knew Henry Kissinger, and we were able to get him as the keynote speaker, and we were able to book the Century Plaza Hotel. And as part of the planning process, we also went around and talked to a lot of other people so that at the dinner, we announced pledges of $2 million. It makes it a lot easier when you're organizing an event if you have 70 to 90% of the money raised in advance, because then what happens at the event is a celebration. It's not trying to manipulate people into doing something that they wouldn't otherwise do. And then lastly, the conversation for possibility. And this actually raises to many more possible questions in the areas, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow. People belong in different levels of participation. So we may be asking people, if we asked you for a contribution, could we count on your support through a personal contribution or a personal investment, and asking others for their investment? Or we might be asking, if you were asked to serve on the board of directors, would you? Or if you were asked to chair a fundraising activity, would you? Or less committed, if you were asked to serve on a board of advisors, would you? Or could we call on you when we have projects that we're looking at? Could we call on you to advise us? These are all conversations for possibility that emerge out of this sequence. I'm going to stop
Quick
here for a
question.
moment to allow you to ask questions about this, what I call the cascading sequence of the 7 conversations. Chris, were you going to ask something there?
Yeah, it looks like the person you're talking to already knows something, or maybe even some details about your organization already.
Yes, that's
So-
really important. It's very important to get as much information as you can to the person in advance. Because if I say, I sent you a packet of information, have you had a chance to look at it? And they say, well, no, I haven't really had a chance to look at it. And if I get to, what do you think of our current and proposed activities? And they say, I don't really know enough about your organization to comment intelligently. Stop there. This now becomes a cultivation conversation where you're actually presenting the activities of the organization that you're representing, or the project that you're raising money for. And my personal preference is not to ask for commitment at that point in time. I think it's really important that you should know, never ask for money on the first date. Take your time. You may or may not be able to jump to asking people for money the first time you talk with them if they don't know what your project is. Now, that's not everyone's approach. One of my great role models in fundraising is a woman named Tracy Gary, who wrote the book Inspired Philanthropy. And Tracy is unabashed about asking people for money. She'll take 2 hours to present a project and just ask them to contribute to or support it. And I've seen her get gifts as large as $1 million with somebody that didn't know about the project that she was presenting. It's just not my style. I'm much more comfortable giving people time to find out about the project that we're talking about. If they say, I don't know enough about your proposed activities, oh, well, we'd love to share more with you. Can you come for a tour? Or can we go on a hike together? Or can we meet at the location so that I can show you what we're doing? And then move the conversation forward more slowly. Does that make sense?
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. It's really important to go at the pace of the dream stream, to flow according to the way that the conversation is moving naturally, and then to take the time to cultivate. When I was working with Planting Justice almost 10 years ago now, one of our street canvassers met a person on the street outside a health food store in El Cerrito or someplace like that in the East Bay. And the guy didn't have time to talk. And Patrick, the canvasser, said, I'd really like to tell you about Planting Justice. And the guy said, I don't have time. I'm on my way to a meeting. And Patrick walked with him to his car. You know, as a street canvasser, you can't stand in front of them. You can't block their their path, but Patrick walked beside him, and when they got to the car, Patrick's still saying, we really think you'll appreciate knowing about this, and I'd like to set up another time when we can talk. And the guy said, well, okay, here's my card, have somebody call me. His card said, Mark F., Executive Director, Thomas J. Long Foundation. And Patrick, the street canvasser, kind of freaked out after the guy drove away in his Mercedes sports car and called me and said, what do I do? This guy's the head of a foundation. I said, send me his business card. And I called him up and went through this sequence of questions. It was an interesting conversation because I was driving from Ashland, Oregon to Portland, Oregon on Interstate 5 and going through the mountains. The reception is terrible in Southern Oregon. And so we got disconnected 5 times during the call. And each time he called me back, which was an interesting indication of interest. It took 6 months to complete this series of conversations because he didn't know anything about the organization. So we had to invite him for a tour and set up opportunities for his board to come and look at what we were doing. But after that 6 months of gradually increasing conversations for possibility, he said, well, we'd really like what you're doing. Why don't you send us a proposal? And I said, how much should we ask for? He said, ask for whatever you need. So I asked him for $1 million. After another few conversations, he said, well, we don't really, we like what you're doing. We've seen your operation, but we don't really know you. We've never given you money before. So would $250,000 a year help? You could do that for 3 years, and then we can talk again about larger support. So it took 6 months to go through these conversations, but it was definitely worth the investment of time and resources and staff and credibility to cultivate that relationship. And you don't always know at the beginning where it's going to go, who's going to make the referral. But go at the pace of the dream stream. Let it flow. Don't try to force the process. Don't get in. This is just my personal preference. Don't get into pitching your organization. Just give people information and then read their level of enthusiasm. Have you ever been involved in something like this in the past? Have you supported other things at what level? That kind of thing.
Paul, this is Marissa. I have a question.
Hi. Yes.
So you get that $250,000. What kind of reporting back do you have to give? What kind of,
To whom are you reporting?
Well, if the Long Foundation gives you $250,000, I mean, if you get a grant, you usually have to do all this reporting back and all that. How much, in many cases, do they just give you the money and then that's it? I mean, what do they expect in return?
It depends on the source and the requirements.
So everybody's different.
So, Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, but the $5 million pledge from the Meadow Fund is basically unrestricted funding. Just tell us what you did with it.
Yep.
A federal grant is going to have very specific guidelines. We got $250,000 for Golden Rule Reentry in Medford that required that they participate in the homeless management information system because they were providing housing for formerly incarcerated people who were facing potential homelessness. They had to learn this vast data management reporting system and hire a part-time staff person to do the data entry to track the impact of what they were doing with the money. So it's determined by the funding source. One of the reasons that I prefer investments or donations from individuals is that they have fewer strings attached usually. So oftentimes when your contribution is from an individual, even if it's $1 million, they just want to see your newsletter at the end of the year. They want to see your financial statement and your balance sheet. That's the kind of donor that I am, or the kind of investor. When I first found out about Arizmendi Eco Village in St. Louis, they were behind on their taxes. And they had this $50 million vision, but in the short range, they needed $100,000 to protect the land so that they could still continue to build the Eco Village. They needed $100,000 to pay their back taxes. So I said, okay, what else do you need? I sent them $100,000 and they paid their taxes and the project stayed alive. And I didn't ask for anything because I knew what they needed the money for. Those are your best kinds of donors, is the people who will contribute what they can afford and not have strings attached because they believe in you. There's a wonderful local foundation in Medford that sent $15,000 to Golden Rule Reentry. And they want an annual report, but it's like half a page. It's like, tell us what you did with the money, because it was general support. And that's the best of all worlds, is when you get a donor or a supporter who knows what you're doing and believes in it, and they don't need a report because they know what you're doing and they're supporting what you're doing. The report that they want is your success. Is that making sense? Other thoughts or questions?
Marissa, you're muted. You were speaking.
All your pearls of
Can you-
wisdom.
Can
You're
you
still muted.
unmute
There
you?
we go.
What I was going to say is that I know that in the past, like getting a grant, then with the small grassroots organization, in the long run, we use up all the money in the reporting back about what
Yeah.
we've done in reports. And I'm like, we just need money to go do our work, you know? So I like the way you think, Paul.
30 years ago, I was the budget chairperson for the North Coast Tobacco Prevention Network in Northern California. I'm a rabid anti-tobacco activist. I think tobacco should be replaced by hemp. David would, I'm sure, agree. For fiber, it's the farmers that drive the whole tobacco industry, and everybody's afraid to put the farmers out of business. But if we gave them industrial hemp as a more profitable crop, the world would change. But I was successful in writing a proposal and getting a pledge from the state of California for, I think it was $800,000 for tobacco education in the 6 North Coast counties in California. And one of the stipulations of the grant was you must channel the money through an administrative agency whose administrative overhead is at least 50%. They wanted an administrator who had a 50% administrative overhead in their standard budget, because they said if you didn't have somebody that large, they wouldn't be able to handle the reporting paperwork. So our $800,000 grant became a $400,000 grant because we had to run it through the Sonoma Office of Education, which took 50% of the money for overhead. Like this federal grant that I was talking about, for providing transitional housing for formerly incarcerated people. It's a huge amount of administrative burden. Probably 50,000 of the 250,000 is going to go towards the reporting requirements. And the other, I mean, I could tell horror stories. One of my clients this week has a $100,000 reimbursement coming from the state of Oregon for a quarterly reporting that they have to file the report and get reimbursed. They can't just ask for the money and spend it. They have to do the work, pay for it, and then invoice for it. So they had received 2 payments already on this large grant, 2 quarterly payments, and they filed their quarterly report. And the state of Oregon said, oh, this is ARPA money. This is the American Rescue Plan Act. And we've just discovered that every entity that receives payment under this grant has to have a unique entity identification number, a UEI number assigned by sam.gov. And we have to have a certificate of liability insurance and a certificate of workers' comp insurance on file, naming us as additional insured. So of this $100,000 reimbursement, there was one payment of $500 to a vendor. Everything else was in-house. So the state is holding up this $100,000 reimbursement until they provide UEI number and a liability insurance certificate and a workers' comp insurance certificate for a little counseling service in Phoenix, Oregon, that has never heard of a workers' compensation certificate. So that you're spot on, toning in on those the reporting requirements for grants. Be sure you get that straight up front, because every time I've done a go, no go analysis on grant funding, the number comes in at $50,000. If it's less than $50,000, it's probably going to require more than the grant is worth in terms of reporting and accounting. That's not always true. I mean, if you're a small startup organization, a $5,000 grant could be somebody's salary, but generally be careful with reporting requirements. All right, I'm going to motor on through two other topics here that we're going to review again tomorrow, because this conversation of the 7 questions pivots around with whom are you having this conversation. So I'm going to share with you a couple of things. The LinkedIn group is going to have these links, and I'll give you the LinkedIn link in a minute, and I'll send it to you by email. But we're going to provide a letter to prospective donor or supporter. That's a sample letter that you can adapt to send out to people that you're going to approach. And if this font is too small, let me know. I can send you the link by email, and we'll put it in the LinkedIn group. But the idea is that the most important, the most influential person that you can find with regard to this individual can send an email or a letter. Usually these days it's an email. The last century we used to use letters. I think there's post offices still functioning. And you simply say, on behalf of this project, I'd like to ask for your advice. And this is one of the nuggets of value that is in this 2-day webinar, is the idea of asking people for their advice. We don't ask for money, we ask for advice. And there's an old axiom that says, if you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice. And so we ask people for their advice. We're considering undertaking a fundraising effort to put our project on solid ground. And before we undertake the effort, we'd like to be sure of the possibility of success in the near future. And it might be me, or it might be you, or it might be some individual is going to contact you to schedule a brief meeting or conversation. I prefer to have meetings in person if it's more than, depends on the project, but 1,000, 10,000. If it's a larger amount of money, doing it in person has lots of benefits. But if they're across the country, Zoom is what we got these days. And we assure them that we're not going to ask for money at this time, and we don't expect them to ask for money at this time. But as part of our conversation, I'd like to ask for your advice on the best ways to reach out to a few key individuals who may be interested in financing this project, or may be able to introduce us to the right people, so that we can also ask for their advice too. That's the gist of this letter, and obviously you're going to adapt it for your own purposes, but we just want to reassure them that they're not going to be asked for money, that we're asking for their advice. And that's, for example, how we began the relationship with David Stewart in St. Louis, was to ask his advice on a project that we were proposing. And then he got interested in the project and became very supportive. But we started out by asking for advice. And then we're not going to ask them for money. We're going to ask them how they would feel about making a contribution or an investment. And if you were asked today, how would you feel about making an investment, or would you consider making an investment or a gift of? It's not directly asking for money, it's asking people how they would feel. Now, I've been accused of being manipulative about this. It actually isn't on my part. I'm actually more interested in how people feel, but you'll develop your own style about the way to have these conversations for possibility. And so I'll put these in the LinkedIn group, and I'll send them the links to you by email later today or first thing tomorrow, so that you can review these things for your own purposes. The LinkedIn group should be in your emails. We invite you to join this group, and we'll put lots of resources, and you can ask questions and engage in dialogue on the LinkedIn group. And what happens now is we're going to move to the VIP session. For the next hour, I'm available on a less formal basis, where I'm not going to be talking so much. It's more an opportunity to engage with your individual projects. I do ask for a small payment of $97 for these 2 sessions combined. And this is the link that you can use. I'll put it in the chat also. It's a link to join the VIP group, and it's an honor session. We're going to go silent in a few minutes, and those of you who are signed up for the VIP session, or who plan to sign up, are welcome to stay on the line and we'll engage in individual conversations about your project and what are the next steps for you. I'm going to end by sharing a song with you because I like to sing and I think life should be joyful and we should have more songs. It's so easy to dream of the days gone by, so hard to think of the times to come, and the grace to accept every moment as a gift is a gift that is given to some. What can we do with our days but work and hope? Let our dreams bind our work to our play. What can we do with each moment of our lives but love till we've loved them away? Love till we've loved them away. There are sorrows enough for the whole world's end. There are no guarantees but the grave. And the times we have shared and the moments we have spent are a treasure too precious to say. What will you do with your days but work and hope? Let your dreams bind your work to your play. What will you do with each moment of your life but love till you've loved it away? Love till you've loved it away.
So, Paul, why didn't all boomers turn out like you?
We'll talk about that tomorrow.
Right.
Thank you all for sharing these precious moments with me. I hope there's been some value for you. We'll reconvene tomorrow at 9 o'clock Pacific. And those of you who
Good.
are staying for the VIP, I'm going to mute for just a few minutes here. If anybody needs to take a bio break or to return a voicemail or something like that, we'll come back online in about 5 minutes.
Thank you,
David
Paul.
Link.
All right, thank you all. Thank
David
you all.
Link.
Paul, I didn't know
Yeah.
about,
Thank you, Paul.
my schedule is a little shaky tomorrow morning, but I'll try to be a participant and I have to run now.
Wonderful.
I appreciate you.
We'll be in touch.
That was a nice song.
Thank you so much.
Okay, be in touch.
Thanks, Paul.